One of the most tragic figures in the Bible comes from the life of King David. Even though she was born a princess and could have become a queen, Michal, the daughter of King Saul and the first wife of King David, lived a life of tragedy and heartache. She likely died a bitter woman. Let's take a look at this fascinating character. King David is a central character in my biblical historical fiction series, Age of the Kingdom, and a wide variety of characters surround him, causing everything from great victories to humiliating scandals which might have ended his kingdom. If you've seen any of my videos, you know I have completed 3 novels in the series, and I'm working on the 4th. The first 2 books, Quest for a King and Exile of the King, cover the period just before King Saul and include his entire reign. The 3rd book in the series, The Eternal Kingdom, covers the first half of the reign of King David, and I wanted to read a passage from that book that is a snapshot of the life of Michal, daughter of King Saul, whom he gave to David as his first wife. In Exile of the King, David has just killed the giant Goliath and becomes King Saul's champion. Saul had promised his daughter's hand in marriage to whoever killed the giant. But when the time came, Saul didn't keep his promise until David spoke to Saul's firstborn son and new friend, Jonathan. Even then, Saul offered the oldest daughter, Merab, but then at the last moment gave her to another. David was angry, and Jonathan finally convinced Saul to give his younger daughter, Michal, to David, which was exactly what she wanted because the Bible says Michal loved David. That statement might sound insignificant to us today, but the Bible rarely says a woman loved a man. Back then, marriage was not strictly about love. It often had more to do with politics or commercial relationships between families. Anyway, for a while, David and Michal had an enthusiastic, loving marriage. They were both young and must have truly enjoyed one another, but then Saul turned against David, owing to his growing mental illness or evil spirit, as the Bible puts it, contrasted with David's increasing popularity. So David had to flee for his life. After that, Saul declared that David had abandoned Michal, so he forced her to marry Paltiel, a wealthy planter from the tribe of Benjamin. This broke Michal's heart, but she gradually let her guard down and learned to love Paltiel. But for roughly 10 years, David hid out, first in the wilderness of Judah, then around the Dead Sea, and finally in Philistine Gath, of all places. He never tried to contact Michal. At the end of Exile of the King, King Saul and his 3 sons are killed in the Battle of Gilboa, and after a little time, David is crowned king of Judah in Hebron. At the same time, Saul's commander-in-chief Abner crowned Saul's 4th and final son, Ishbosheth, king of the northern tribes, and there is a civil war. After a year and a half, it's clear David's warriors will win, and Abner abandons Ishbosheth, offering to hand over the northern tribes to David and make him king of all Israel. David agrees, but he has a condition. Abner must first bring Michal and restore her as his wife, and that's where I want to start reading in the Eternal Kingdom, when Abner goes to take Michal away from Paltiel and return her to David. When Abner and his escort arrived at the home of Paltiel, they could see no one until the prosperous planter himself emerged from a stable behind the large, ornate house. Paltiel's face went white when he saw Abner and the weapons of the soldiers. Abner could see that he looked much older than when he last saw him. Then one of Paltiel's grown sons came out of the stable holding a hay fork. By order of King David of Judah, Michal, daughter of Saul, must be returned to him, Abner announced. What? Paltiel cried. Lord, I pray you will reconsider. It is not for me to decide. The king has ordered it. Then Michal came out of the house. accompanied by another wife of Paltiel and a couple of children. "Cousin Abner," Michal exclaimed, "why are you here?" "King David has decreed that now that your father is dead, you should once again be his wife. But I am happy here. Paltiel needs me. The king has spoken. You must come with me. Gather whatever belongings are important to you." Paltiel took a step forward. "Lord Abner, do not rip my family apart. We are a loving family here. What have we to do with the king in Judah? Stand aside, Paltiel. We have our orders." "So you serve Judah now, you snake?" Paltiel scoffed. Abner had to make only the slightest motion to the soldiers who accompanied him, and they quickly moved to restrain Paltiel and step between him and Michal. Paltiel's grown son tensed his hands on the hayfork, but a soldier lowered his spear in his direction, and no one moved. "Michal, you must gather whatever you wish to take with you," Abner said. "Do it quickly." Michal and Paltiel looked at one another, tears running down their faces, but they were prevented from approaching one another by the soldiers. Finally, she entered the house, escorted by a couple of Abner's men. "Please, Lord, if this must be, allow us a proper goodbye," Paltiel pleaded. Michal emerged from the house of Paltiel carrying a couple of bundles and a leather shoulder bag, accompanied by the soldiers. She looked at Paltiel sadly for a moment and then turned wordlessly to climb into the wagon. She was determined not to weep or show any weakness for the benefit of Paltiel, but also to avoid feeding Abner's power fetish. He had sent her to Paltiel in the first place, carrying out her father's decree. She had wept endlessly then, but would not give him the satisfaction now. Abner climbed in from the other side to sit beside her as if to let her know she couldn't easily jump out and run away. One of the soldiers swatted the rump of the donkey pulling the wagon, and it leaned into the harness, causing the wagon to lurch into motion. Paltiel began to weep loudly and followed along as the procession left his property. Abner looked back at him, annoyed. Michal knew Abner would likely assume Paltiel would stop following them, but he did not. He continued crying, following just a few cubits behind the wagon. The broken-hearted man followed for miles, continuing to weep loudly until they reached Bahurim, near the desolated former Levite town of Nob, when Abner could take no more. "Stop it," Abner cried. "Stop following us. Return home to the rest of your family." Michal turned to look back as Paltiel partly obeyed Abner and stopped pursuing the wagon. He did not immediately turn toward home, however, but stood watching them go with tears continuing to flow. Michal felt sorry for him. She had been forced to marry him 12 years ago and had resisted his overtures until he finally won her over with his patience and authentic love. His tears only confirmed what she already knew. He really loved her. But just as she had been taken from David so many years ago, she was now taken from Paltiel to be returned to David. She had truly loved David, but she was older now and knew how capricious men could be, especially kings. She wondered what it would be like to be with David again. When they were married, he was not yet 20. Now he was more mature, and she knew he had fiercely loyal followers who had supported him through his exile from her father. Why had David asked for her? She had failed during their brief marriage to give him a child of either gender, much less a son who could succeed him as king. She had also failed during the 12 years of marriage to Paltiel to give him offspring. She had cared for the children of Paltiel's other wife, but had remained childless herself. Time would tell what her life would be like as David's queen. as always, she had little control over her fate. So Michal was taken from David against her will and stayed with Paltiel long enough to learn to love him, but then was taken again against her will and returned to David. Unfortunately, she finds out that David now has 5 additional wives, plus 20 concubines and too many children to count. All of this apparently made Michal bitter. The assassinations of her uncle Abner and her brother Ishbosheth probably didn't help her attitude at all. David finally consigned her to solitude until she died, after she denounced him for removing his outer garments and dancing with young girls when he brought the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. The Bible says she never bore any children. It's not clear if David had relations with her after she was returned to him, but the Bible says he never had relations with her again after she denounced him. So Michal is a tragic figure in the life of David. She loved him, but then when he was forced to flee, he didn't try to find her or communicate with her until it was politically helpful to him. Making her his wife again was a way of showing Israel, especially Saul's tribe of Benjamin, that he was a legitimate successor to King Saul, Michal's father. There would be more tragedy in the lives of Michal's family later in David's reign. That story will be in the 4th novel of the Age of the Kingdom series, Children of the King. That's all for this episode. Like this video and subscribe if you enjoy this content. See you next time for more stories from the Age of the Kingdom.